Of the Public Safety Committee, and we are privileged to have Minister Blair with us for the next 2 hours to talk about his mandate letter. I particularly appreciate his willingness to make himself available to members. He's going to open with a statement, and then we are going to go directly to questions. We might take a very short break and then go on to the second hour and do a second round of questions. So, Minister Blair, you clearly need no introduction at this committee. You're welcome, and we look forward to your opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to vice chairs and committee members, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to join you here today. I'd like to begin by also extending my thanks for your indulgence of me last week and when I was scheduled to appear before your committee, and unfortunately, because of rather long votes that went on, and then it overlapping with a very important cabinet agenda that I had to address, I'm grateful that you were able to accommodate the rescheduling of my attendance here today. I'm also pleased to be joined today by the senior officials responsible for the agencies and departments of my portfolio. And specifically, I'm joined by Chairperson Jennifer Odes from the Parole Board, Director David Vigneault from CSIS, Commissioners Ann Kelly from Correction Services Canada, Commissioner Brenda Lucki from the RCMP, and President John Osowski from the CBSA. For all of those who are new to this committee, I'd like to welcome you all to your new roles and also extend my very sincere good wishes that we will have many opportunities to work in the best interest of all Canadians together. And I fully anticipate this will be perhaps only the first of many opportunities where I'll be asked to come back before your committee, and I look forward to those opportunities. I also appreciate the opportunity to say a few words about some of the issues facing us, and although we'll canvass that in greater detail in your questions. I'd like to begin my remarks today by reiterating all of our collective thoughts with the families and friends for the tragic events that took place in Quebec City last night or over the weekend. We know that certainly a terrible tragedy for the families, but also the people of Quebec City. It's important, I think, for Canadians not only to recognize the historic significance and importance of Quebec City, but also to recognize it is one of the safest cities anywhere in the world, and for that community to have its sense of safety and security so terribly wrenched from them was indeed a tragic event. The individual responsible has now been charged, and I'd also want to take the opportunity, if I may, to offer my very sincere admiration to all of the first responders, the medical responders and the police, who took very effective and immediate action. And so I wanted to acknowledge them. We reached out, of course, to Quebec and to the Quebec City Police to assist if necessary, but this was not, as we've learned from the police, a national security event, rather just a terrible tragedy. I also want to acknowledge that since I was last given my mandate in the fall after the 2019 election, the world changed rather significantly, and in short order, the government was required to shift its focus, although we still very much in the business of governing, and in my portfolio, keeping Canadians safe. Much of our focus was by necessity shifted to the pandemic response, and that remains a key priority for the government, and it has a key focus of my ministry. We have taken very significant and unprecedented action to limit the spread of COVID-19 in Canada. We have, of course, taken very significant actions to protect our borders, and I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have about that. But beginning as early as January 26th, we began putting in place screening measures at our airports to stop the spread of COVID-19. And then over the course of the ensuing several weeks, we took the unprecedented but necessary step of actually closing the American border to all discretionary travel, while at the same time working hard to make sure that we maintain vital supply lines and the movement of essential workers and essential goods. And I have some update that I can provide this committee if there's time, Mr. Chair, that I think will assist the members in understanding the effectiveness of the measures that have been taken. We continue to review those decisions on a regular basis in consultation with both our domestic and international partners, the provinces, territories, as well, particularly as the United States. We have, as I'm sure you're aware, recently announced a scaling up of the federal public health presence at the border. We are now covering 36 points of entry that account for 90% of all traffic into Canada. And that's a total force of 190 public health officers, which is up from the 18 we were at when the pandemic first began. The Canadian Border Service Agency has been working very closely with the Public Health Agency of Canada, including on strengthening compliance and enforcement efforts on mandatory quarantine and isolation orders. Mr. Chair, you'll indulge me if I take an opportunity to acknowledge the extraordinary work of our border service officers. We have asked them to do a job that was frankly unprecedented and even inconceivable in the weeks and months prior to the closing of that border, and yet they have responded extraordinarily well. They've done an extremely difficult job. It's a daily issue of as MPs from across the country have reached out to attempt to resolve issues at our border, but our border service officers, in my opinion, have done an exemplary job of maintaining the health and safety of Canadians while continuing to adapt to a rapidly evolving situation. With respect to legislation, I want to advise this committee that we have an ambitious agenda in the year ahead. As you know, in my mandate, the Prime Minister asked me to serve as the Minister of Public Safety in part because I bring some experience in the issue of keeping communities safe, having spent many years on the front lines of policing. There are a number of issues that remain a significant priority to us. I would mention in particular firearms-related crime remain very high in Canada. We've actually seen an unacceptable and very worrisome increase in gun violence in many of the communities across Canada, and we are determined to address that gun violence as a priority. As the committee is aware, on May 1st, the government took very significant and decisive action in an effort to protect Canadians and strengthen gun control by prohibiting over 1,500 models of firearms that were not designed for the legitimate activities of hunting and sport shooting, but rather were designed with their intent and effectiveness as tactical weapons for combatants to shoot other combatants. We've also put in place an amnesty to give the existing owners time to come into compliance with the law, and we are providing a temporary exception as well for Indigenous persons exercising Section 35 constitutional rights. We have signaled our intent to implement a buyback program as part of the legislation that we will bring forward, and I would like to reiterate our commitment to ensuring that effective owners and businesses are compensated fairly, while at the same time making sure that the implementation and management costs of such a program are responsibly enacted and sustainable. And we are working with Parliament, provinces, territories, First Nations to get this right for law-abiding gun owners and businesses. I've also been very clear, and it's clear in my mandate, that the government of Canada will strengthen Canada's gun control framework. That's why we will be introducing legislation in the near term to introduce a red flag regime to reduce cases of intimate partner violence and suicide by temporarily removing firearms from individuals. Mr. Speaker, I take your point, and there's a number of other things that I could speak to, but I want to move ahead quickly on two things. I want to speak to the focus of our government and on this committee in making progress in policing and justice reform. All Canadians need to have confidence that the justice system is there to provide justice for them. We know that Black Canadians and Indigenous peoples are overrepresented in the criminal justice system, and we are prepared to make significant actions, both in investment and legislation, in order to change that. And I'll happy to speak to those issues as well. And finally, if I may, Mr. Speaker, I would also like to actually, it's on my remarks. I'd like to speak to some of the actions we are taking with respect to individuals who are involved in hostile activities by state actors, which threatens the safety and security and the interests of Canadians. And I wanted to be able to assure this committee that we take these matters very seriously, and that all of our national security apparatus is focused on remaining vigilant against those threats and taking appropriate action to protect Canadians. Mr. Speaker, given our time constraints, I'll stop my remarks there and hope to be able to explore a number of these and other matters with the committee in response to your questions. Thank you.
time is the enemy of us all, and so with that, I'm just take note that Madam May, Elizabeth May from the Green Party, also wishes to somehow or another wedge a question in here, and all the other and all the standing the members of the standing committee also are very keen on asking you questions. So I apologize insincerely, but upfront, that I may be cutting people off from time to time in order to be able to respect the time of members. With that, I'm the first 6-minute round goes to Madam Stubbs, Mr. Yakano, Madame Michaud, and Mr. Harris. So, Madame Stubbs, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here with us this evening. Minister, your mandate letter commits you to delivering results and effective government to Canadians. On October 22nd, as you announced, the last commissioner was finally appointed for the inquiry into the mass murder in Nova Scotia, which was almost 7 months ago. Now, the families have asked for the inquiry in terms of reference to examine and report on the processes and the reasons for the delay in announcing and starting the public inquiry. Last week, I asked you in QP about honoring that request from the families, but you dismissed it and said it was for, quote, political advantage. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to either clarify those remarks or just answer why it is you think that request from the families is something related to political advantage.
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, I did not ascribe that intent or motive to the families, but rather to you, Ms. Stubbs.
You did indeed.
Yeah, that's right. And let me be very clear. In the days and hours immediately following the terrible tragedy of the mass shooting that took place on April 18th and 19th, I reached out to the Nova Scotia government. I began working very closely with them because we knew that there were many questions that people would have, and we know that they needed the answers. And so we began immediately to develop a process whereby both the government of Nova Scotia, which has policing jurisdiction for that community, but also the federal government, because we have a role and a responsibility there as particularly in oversight of the RCMP, to ensure that there was a fulsome examination of all of the events that took place there that gave rise to that terrible tragedy and how it was responded to in its immediate aftermath, and to make recommendations on how we can improve the response.
So, Minister, thank you. Of course, the question wasn't from me. It was directly from the families of the victims. And I'll just quote you exactly what they've said, just for clarity. They have said this, that given the delay in further victimization of the families, all processes concerning the calling of the public inquiry should be included, that the governmental actions must be disclosed and examined in a public forum to ensure a meaningful public inquiry, that it's the only way the families and the public will gain a full understanding of the government's mishandling of the public inquiry from its inception, and to ensure that in the future such processes are transparent, fair, and conducted in a timely manner. So your government does control the terms of reference through the OIC. Will you commit to honoring the family's request for all the reasons and the processes related to the delay in the public inquiry?
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. And what we have committed to is the conduct of a full and comprehensive public inquiry. We have empowered 3 public inquiry commissioners in order to determine all of the circumstances and factors that gave rise to the terrible tragedy of April 18th and 19th, to examine everything that was done in response to that terrible tragedy, but with a particular emphasis on the services that were provided to victims in that case, and to then make recommendations to both the government of Nova Scotia and to the federal government on how these terrible tragedies can be prevented. That's the purpose of the public inquiry. I think it's important. We listened to those families, Shannon. We know that they had concerns and questions that they needed to answer. We also heard them say that they were not satisfied with the review, that they wanted a full public inquiry. We responded to those concerns and called that we've been working diligently to ensure that we have the 3 right people, and I'm very, very pleased with all 3 of the people that have agreed to participate as as the panel for that public inquiry. We've ensured that they have the resources to establish the secretariat and the processes to answer the questions provided in those terms of reference. We promised those people that we would get answers to their questions regarding that terrible tragedy in April, and that's what we've undertaken to do. And we've now empowered a public inquiry to get them those answers.
Minister, have you actually spoken directly to any of the family members of the victims?
I will tell you that I've been working very closely with the police on the ground and with Attorney General Fury, who has reached out to the families. There were people that the Nova Scotia government
I know the Prime Minister has spoken to some of the victims. It might be helpful, just so you're assured that my questions are not out of political motivation. You can hear directly from them that they do believe governments have acted secretly and not in their best interests. But moving on, given that your mandate also includes the parole board, I thought I'd just ask you another question on behalf of victims of crime. This one is from Lisa Freeman, whose father was brutally murdered in 1991. She has said very clearly, I think spoken on behalf of lots of victims' families, that they really want to be seen and to be heard. And she and other victims' families were denied the right to present at parole hearings by video. Now, I know and I understand you did announce that your department is finally in the process of working on this now, although it probably was an issue that could have been anticipated. So just only asking this in Lisa's own words. She says, quote, "Why were you satisfied to have a paper hearing when you were aware that I couldn't attend because of COVID 6 months ago and leave me waiting 3 weeks for an answer?"
A little less than 30 seconds, if you would, Minister.
Yeah, first of all, I understand the stress of both for frankly all of the people and the importance of having their voices heard. We have been working with the parole board in order to implement, first of all, the ability of them to participate either through paper or by telephone. As I've announced, on November the 9th, in Ontario and Quebec, the video conferencing is now established for victims and elders to attend those parole hearings. And on November 23rd, that'll be implemented right across the country.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. With that, it's 6 minutes for Mr. Iacconò.
Monsieur le Président, et bonsoir, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Mr. Minister.
Discours du trône sur la réforme.
I heard the announcement in the speech from the throne about reform. Currently, legal fees are high, and so conditional release is often unaffordable for citizens who have average or low income. Another issue that should be reformed, those who have a criminal record so they can't find a job, and we need a job and an income to function in society. Minister, could you describe in broad strokes the outline of your legal system reform? And COVID-19, the government has addressed it. The government has done a very good job. Will the pandemic, though, have an impact on your legal reform?
Well, I think these are perhaps the greatest challenges facing government. I think one of the things that the pandemic has revealed to us, along with some very difficult situations that we have faced in Canada, but right across North America as well, is the existence of significant systemic and structural disparity in the outcomes for Indigenous people and for poorer people and racialized people in our criminal justice system. And it's one of the reasons in the throne speech, we made it very clear that we will introduce both legislation and make investments, and both are very important, that take action to address the systemic inequities in all phases of the criminal justice system. And I think it's important to recognize that people often focus in on one element of it, but what we have seen is that there are structural and systemic issues within the broader criminal justice system, from diversion to sentencing, rehabilitation to records, that is having a disparate outcome for Canadians who are Indigenous or from racialized communities. And let me just give you some examples of some of the things that I believe are necessary for us to reform. And you mentioned criminal records, and I think it's we know that when people apply for a pardon to their criminal record, almost 75% of them have actually never spent a day in jail. but they have that criminal record. And although they may have received a conditional sentence and not been sentenced to any period of incarceration, 30 and 40 years later, that criminal record is having an impact on the quality of their life and their abilities to succeed as Canadians. And so we are looking at ways in which we will make this record suspension, as it's now called, or pardons as it's more commonly referred to make it more accessible. Part of that is the impediment of cost. Another issue for a lot of people is the bureaucratic thing of having to make application, significant background checks. For many people, I think it is fair to say that the pardon regime or record suspension regime that has been in place in Canada has made it inaccessible, particularly to people in lower income margins, for racialized communities, and for Indigenous people. And so we are looking at significant reform to make those pardons more accessible. There's a number, I think, of very important ways that we can do that. We're also looking at issues at sentencing, because I think it's an undeniable fact that in our prison system, there is a very significant and unacceptable disproportionate number of Indigenous men and women and racialized people, particularly young Black men in our prison system, grossly out of proportion. And I believe that there are issues within the criminal justice system that we need to look at systemically. We're dealing with things like training and reform for all of the justice participants to make sure that there's anti-racism training and that they understand the influence that bias can have on them. But there are some systemic and structural changes that we need to make as well. And so we will do all of those things.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. Next question. It's about COVID-19 in our prisons. Our prisons have not been spared. The Federal Training Center has been hard hit by COVID-19. COVID-19 has had many negative impacts. So here's my short question. What measures will the Correctional Service take? What measures are they already taking so that the second wave doesn't see the same challenges that we saw during the first wave?
And it's a very important question, because we have a duty of care for people who are in federal custody, and we did, as you've noted, in the first wave of the pandemic, we had the infection go into 5 different institutions, including in your riding, the Federal Training Center. The Corrections Services Canada took very proactive steps. They worked, first of all, with the Public Health Agency of Canada, but also with the provincial and regional health authorities. They took a number of very significant steps. First of all, they made changes in limiting the number of people coming and going from the prisons, and that had an impact on the prison population as well, which they worked very hard to accommodate. They actually brought in health experts to do infection control measures, workplace health and safety audits. They were one of the very first institutions in the federal government to make personal protection equipment available to all, both inmates and the workers in the prisons. They implemented a very robust testing regime, the first place in all of the federal institutions. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that in all the provincial institutions, but they did it federally. And as a result of their excellent work, in a very short period of time, by mid-June, they had eliminated all ongoing infections in the correctional institutions. And they have remained a very, very vigilant regime of protecting the inmates and the people who work in those institutions to keep the illness out. And when, for example, a corrections worker contracts the disease in his own community, not in the institution, because of the rigorous regime that they put in place and the testing regime that's in place, we've been able to keep very effectively that illness out. It's not a guarantee. We know that's a vulnerable population, but they have, I think, Corrections Service of Canada did some extraordinary work, which frankly we have shared with others, because there were lessons learned in that work of infection prevention, control, and the workplace health and safety audits, and the measures that they took place in personal protection and in testing and tracing, which were extremely effective in keeping that population safe.
Thank you, Mr. Iacconò, and I caution all members and witnesses about run-on sentences with many conjunctions. 6 minutes, Madame Michaud.
Président, et merci, Monsieur le Ministre, pour votre
Thank you, Minister. And thank you, Chair. And thank you to all witnesses for joining us tonight. We are asking you questions about your 2019 mandate letter, even though there was a new speech from the throne recently in 2020. You've had almost a year to begin to act on your commitments as outlined in your 2019 mandate letter. Here's what I'm wondering about. I'm wondering about border protection and the border protection system. You committed to working with the United States to modernize the Safe Third Country Agreement. The pandemic obviously has had an impact on your work and has created many challenges for border protection. I'd like to come back on the timeline of events, though, especially the time between the need to close the border and then when the border was actually closed. And I'm wondering whether the timeline, if we had acted earlier, whether we could have had less cases in Canada. I remember the Pierre Elliott Trudeau airport. Things were going terribly, and in fact, Mayor Valérie Plante, Mayor of Montreal, went with police officers and health officers to the airport to handle things herself. There wasn't enough PPE. There was no information being given to incoming travelers about quarantine orders. Why did your government take so long to close the borders? What explains the delay, especially in closing the border with the United States?
For the question, quite frankly, I'm a little shocked at the suggestion that we were slow to close the border. I've actually gone back through Hansard, and Hansard keeps an excellent record of all of the questions that were put to the government. I can't find a single incident where anyone in any part of the House recommended a closing of the border with the United States. Frankly, we were working really closely at the time, primarily with British Columbia, who was very concerned with a high rate of infection in the state of Washington. And I can advise you that directly as a result of those conversations, myself and the Deputy Prime Minister reached out to the Americans and began a conversation with them about restricting non-essential travel. We also engaged with them in a very important discussion about maintaining essential supply lines and the movement of essential workers back and forth across the border. From that first conversation when we reached out to the United States until the Prime Minister and the President of the United States announced it was less than 24 hours. And so I believe we moved with incredible alacrity and speed in order to do that. It is the largest undefended border in the world, some 6,000 kilometers, and as well, there are very many points of entry, and our officials were able to respond with remarkable speed in essentially shutting that border down very effectively to non-essential travel, and it was done, I think, with remarkable speed. And if one looks at the timing of that and compares it with actions that were taken place in other parts of the world with respect to the border closures, you'll see that Canada and the United States were at the forefront of that effort.
Moi, je me souviens du président national.
Yes, but in fact, the Union of Customs Agents, Jean-Pierre Fortin, he was really exacerbated, and he said that Border Services agents were really left to their own devices, and in fact, they weren't even consulted before they found out about new orders that were implemented, and the border closure has been renewed every month since March 2020. Why not be more transparent and tell us more about your long-term plans for border closures rather than renewing the border closure at the last minute once a month? And in fact, on this topic, Premier Legault of Quebec this week, he said that it's important that we maintain the border closed. Provinces have a pretty heavy workload because they are receiving a lot of incoming migrants through regular border points. What is the long-term plan? Will you leave the border closed for another few months? I think that's necessary, but at the same time, Canadians and Quebecers would like to know what the plan is in the long term.
As long as it is necessary to restrict discretionary travel, non-essential travel from the United States or from other places in the world. That's why we put those restrictions in places to protect the health and safety of Canadians. I would point out that I regularly communicate, and I know the president of CBSA regularly communicates with the union representing CBSA officers. As I noted in my opening remarks, I think they've done an extraordinary job in implementing very, very significant new restrictions, and in the exercise of their discretion to keep us safe, they have done, and I think we all owe them a debt of gratitude for the work that they've done. I also want to tell you that I engage very regularly with my counterparts in the province of Quebec, but right across Canada, in our provincial and territorial discussions. We work very closely. The order in council is for 30 days. That closes the border. We continually assess conditions on both sides of the border and the effectiveness of the measures that we've been put in place. And we will continue to keep that border closed until the circumstances change significantly enough to facilitate a change at that border, which would not compromise the health and safety of Canadians. And so I know everybody wants to know for how long, and I think reasonably, especially when we see the conditions that exist in the United States and the very significant surge in the virus that's taking place right across that country. I believe it's very much in Canada's interest to maintain those border restrictions, and we will do that as long as it is necessary to protect the health and safety of Canadians.
Thank you, Madame Michaud. Mr. Harris, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And for those watching, I'm here in the dark. It's not a Halloween hangover, but it's due to a power outage in our neighborhood, and there's a power company truck out trying to fix the wires. So that's just don't worry about the distraction. Thank you, Mr. Blair, and your fellow witnesses that came with you for your presence tonight. And you have a lot on your plate, I know. So I'll just get right down to business, and starting with the RCMP and the mass murder in Nova Scotia back in April, which is a great tragedy. Everyone was expecting an immediate public inquiry to be called, and in fact, there were noises about that in the days following the tragedy. And of course, there were questions and suspicions about the history of the perpetrators' connections with the RCMP, and people wanted to get to the bottom of all of that, as well as the response that took place in the communities. It took a very long time, and then eventually there was going to be a review and no inquiry. And the suspicion was that the government, particularly the federal government, was interested in avoiding too much scrutiny of the RCMP. And the public, of course, and the victims wanted to get to the truth and thought that the public inquiry was the best way to do that. Why did it take so long to make a decision, and why did you do a review and not the inquiry? Did those suspicions about your attempt to, or was there any hint of trying to protect the RCMP from scrutiny in that decision-making process?
Thank you, Jack. And I understand the question, and let me take this opportunity to assure you, but also the people of Nova Scotia, and particularly the families of those victims, there's absolutely no intention whatsoever to hide anything. And in fact, just even in the immediate hours before, while the criminal investigation was still ongoing, I had already reached out to the province of Nova Scotia, and of course they have inquiry authorities, as does the federal government. But there were other circumstances where reviews have taken place where the work can be done, and we reached out, for example, to retired Chief Justice MacDonald to head that up, and so that work began right from the outset, and the full intention was to make sure that we got all of the answers that the families needed, and we also sought advice and recommendations so that the response could be improved.
If I may interrupt, though, that was the whole point of a public inquiry, where where people were given given evidence under oath, and all information would be made out in the public. That didn't happen, and it took a long time for the federal government to make up its mind. So can you give me a direct answer to that question? Was there any attempt by the government of Canada to avoid direct scrutiny of the RCMP?
No, absolutely to the contrary, Jack. The intention was to answer all of the questions that arose from that terrible tragic event, to examine everyone's involvement, including the RCMP, and so there was no intention to hide anything. I will tell you, it was also important. There was a very significant criminal investigation taking place, and I know there was a lot of speculation and actually some false information that was put out that raised a level of anxiety But we listened very carefully to those families. It was clear that they really needed to see a full public inquiry. We responded to that, and we've taken the steps. And I do understand that it did take some time to identify after one of the panelists stepped away to replace them.
Thank you, Minister. And we hope that the public do get the answers, and the victims' families do get the answers that they need as quickly as possible, but as thorough as possible too. Still in Nova Scotia, recently the incidents with the Mi'kmaq lobster fishermen being attacked and harassed and beaten and property damage. There was warning about that from the chiefs in the Atlantic provinces to the government that this was happening, that there were threats happening, and this was expected. But yet there was no proper RCMP response. Why was that?
Well, Jack, let me be very clear. First of all, as you well know, the police jurisdiction in Nova Scotia is the responsibility of the Nova Scotian government. Seeing the level of conflict and concern that was arising there, I actually reached out to the Nova Scotia government, discussed with the Attorney General about resources required to keep the peace there and to enforce the law.
But there was a failure of presence, even knowing that this was being threatened and about to happen, and even when the RCMP were present there and watching it happen, instead of intervening and protecting the peace. So why was that?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand that the role of the police there is primarily to maintain the peace and to prevent offenses from taking place. And when they do take place, to conduct investigations and lay charges. Jack, that has actually happened. The person responsible for assaulting Chief Sachs has now been charged. The person responsible for setting fire to that van has now been charged. And frankly, I think there was an issue of adequate resources on scene to make sure that the police were able to do their job of keeping the peace while others worked to resolve the issues under dispute. But I mean, making sure that the law was upheld, and when people committed offenses, as they did, that they be held to account. And we saw that the night of that terrible tragic fire, the police have now identified obviously a person of interest. They're conducting other investigations. I'm very confident that people will be held to account for the crimes that were committed.
Mr. Harris, you've only got about 20 seconds left, and maybe we could add it to your 2.5 minutes in the next round.
Let's do that. Thanks.
That completes the first round. Our second round starts with Mr. Motts, 5 minutes, Madame Damoff, 5 minutes, 2.5 minutes for Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes for Mr. Harris, and 5 minutes for Mr. Kirk, and 5 minutes for Madame Cara. So, Mr. Motts, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Minister, the Eglinton West Crips were taken down recently by a joint police investigation. They seized 31 firearms, 7 kilograms of cocaine, 2 kilograms of fentanyl, 2 kilos of meth, other drugs including heroin, oxycodone, Percocets, MDA, along with $300,000 in cash. How many of these arrested were licensed firearm owners, and how many of the firearms were legal in Canada? Minister, no, I'm not going to ask you to answer that because we already know the answer. You and I know, as well as all Canadians know, that the answer to that question is none. None of the licensed firearm owners, none of those arrested were licensed firearm owners, and none of those firearms were legal in this country. So since coming into government in the last 5 years, your government has spent over $4 billion more on public safety departments and agencies than in the previous 5 years. And yet with all that extra funding since 2015, every crime statistic tracked by Stats Canada have increased. The crime rate is up. The crime severity index is up. Gang shootings are up. Gang homicides are up. Domestic violence are up. Drug use, drug addiction, and drug overdoses are up. Police resource challenges are up. Border security concerns are up. Cybercrimes are up. And I could go on. So Canadians have lost trust in you and your party to protect them, regardless of the huge sums of taxpayer money that you continue to pour at the problems. Your plan is obviously failing, Minister. So why is your massive spending failing to protect Canadians and reduce crime as they expect their governments to do for them?
Well, thank you for the question. And one thing I would point out, because you began talking about some outstanding work that was done by the police in Ontario to deal with guns and gangs in their jurisdiction. And we committed $327 million to that effort, including $65 million in the province of Ontario. And I would contrast that, Glenn, with the investment that in 10 years of conservative government, the investment they made in dealing with gun and gang violence in Canada. And in comparison to the $327 million we invested in a robust police response to deal with those criminals and that violence, in 10 years of conservative government, not a nickel. Not a single dollar was allocated to support those police efforts. And so I appreciate that you don't think we should make investments in policing, but we do.
Minister, that's not at all what I said, and that's not at all what I asked. But I'll move on to the next question for you. Angus Reid's poll before the pandemic suggested that half of Canadians said crime is rising in the neighborhood in the last 5 years. 2 in 3 Canadians don't have faith in the criminal courts. There is a 30% increase in people reporting that they were victims of crime. Recent reports and news show that Canadians in downtown Vancouver no longer consider it a safe place to live. They're asking where their public leaders are and why they aren't doing more. In Toronto this year, there have been well over 400 shootings and nearly 200 people killed or injured. So far this year, shootings are up 10% alongside a 20% increase in shooting deaths. Clearly, your policy are not working, as I said previously, and your plan is failing Canadians across the board. So given that fact, what new plans are you and your government proposing that will finally address the issues around rising violent crime rates, gang crime, gang violence, the killings that plague our communities, a plan that will actually improve public safety, Minister, across this country?
Well, thank you very much, Glenn. And these are very important questions, and I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity to speak to them. First of all, I do believe that financing and supporting an effective police response to deal with guns and gangs in our community is important. You didn't, but we do. And we made that investment. But we also said that we're going to strengthen gun control in this country. And by the way, if you want to quote various public opinion polls, Canadians overwhelmingly support strengthening gun control. We have taken some fairly significant steps to remove weapons from our society that have no place, but we're going to do more, Glenn. We're going to bring forward new legislation that will strengthen our response at the border, for example. And that isn't mean just new offenses, new authorities, and new penalties, but it's new investments. $89 million that we've invested and continue to invest in the RCMP and our Border Services officers to make them more effective in countering the firearms smuggling into this country, offenses that you in a committee a couple of years ago referred to as paper crimes that shouldn't have a penalty. I disagree. We're also going to make it more difficult for people to gain access to firearms through criminal diversion and theft. We're taking steps to strengthen our gun control in this country to make it more difficult for criminals to get access to guns, because I believe that effective gun control is an important element.
Your plan isn't working today, that's for sure.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Madame Damoff, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here and all of your officials. Minister, the numbers coming out of correctional services are dismal. There's rising numbers of Indigenous and Black Canadians in prison. SIUs are not functioning as they were legislated and attended. Dr. Dube presented absolutely horrific stats on the SIUs. The correctional investigator highlighted a number of issues that continue to need attention: employment training programs, patient advocates, use of dry cells, and more. Having been on this committee for 5 years, I too find it frustrating to ask CSC the same questions time and time again without change. Earlier today, I asked Dr. Zinger about implementing targets and mandatory reporting for CSC, and he responded that the mandate letter provided to the Commissioner was good, but that it needs timelines and further refinement. And I'm wondering, Minister, if you would consider updating her mandate letter to refine, provide those timelines, and put targets in place.
Yeah, and Pam, these are really important questions. And Commissioner Kelly's on the line, and I'm reminded that I have all the agency heads here with us today, and I don't want to sort of take their opportunity to respond. But I'm in agreement with you that it's important, I think. And if you want to achieve something, what's measured is what's achieved. I think there needs to be clear transparency so that people can see. I want to also commend the work of Dr. Zenger. I work very closely with Dr. Zenger. I've actually known and worked with him for a number of years. I think his advice and his observations are very important and very helpful, and I listen very carefully to what he has to say. I think very clear expectations need to be defined, I think, in a number of different areas, and not just corrections, but right across the entire public safety portfolio. I think we need to have timelines clearly defined. We're working through that, Pam, because I'm in agreement with that, and I think it needs to be open and transparent. I believe, by the way, the commissioners do as well. They want to be effective. They see the challenges of, frankly, many of our systems within the criminal justice system produce really bad results for Indigenous people and for racialized people, and we know we need to do better.
Thank you, Minister. Commissioner Lucky, my next question is for you. Colton Boushie died in 2016. His family filed a complaint in 2016, and when the RCMP ruled that they'd acted properly, the family filed another complaint to the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. At your last appearance during the summer before this committee, I asked you about the report on Colton Boushie case, and at the time you said, and I quote, "I can't emphasize enough the importance of such a review. CRCC has done extensive research and a great job on the review, and we need to give the same consideration to the review. I'm planning to have that review done by the fall of this year." So it's now November 2020, and I'm wondering, when can we expect your response?
Thank you for that question. The CRCC completed their public interest investigation in January 2020 and provided us thereafter the interim report. And obviously, we're in the process of reviewing the high volume of relevant material, and given the complexities of the recommendations and findings by the CRCC, a bit of time is required to prepare a thorough and well-founded response.
But, Commissioner, with all due respect, one of the reasons that report didn't get you to January 2020 is there was a delay in the RCMP providing the CRCC with information. Is the family going to see the report anytime soon?
Yes, as promised previously, as you mentioned, I intend on having that response completed by the end of this fall.
Okay, thank you. And then I have 1 minute left. Commissioner Kelly, we allocated $500 million to implement SIUs. This was a piece of legislation that I was proud to pass, but as we've learned, things have not gone as they should have. I'm wondering if you can let us know how this $500 million has been spent and how much has been spent creating these new mental health isolation units, or whatever they're called. Because originally, my understanding, that money was going to programming and additional costs needed for staffing.
You have about 30 seconds.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. Actually, I'd really like to be able to also go back to Dr. Dube and tell a bit of the story, because there is more to the story. But in terms of the money that's been allocated for the first year, for 2019-20, it was around $48.5 million. Some monies went to health, some to human resources, and some to SIUs. We had to hire correctional officers, program officers, parole officers, nurses. We had to train the staff. That included the correctional training program for CX.
So, Commissioner, could we get a breakdown sent to the committee of how much was spent on infrastructure and how much was spent on everything else?
It would be very helpful, Commissioner, if that could be done, and then we could do some follow-up. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to move on. Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to the border issue and also to the entrance, just like the Roxham Road that is still open, although our borders are closed. it would be unacceptable to let asylum seekers, although the pandemic was underway. So I think it was the ideal situation to suspend the third country that is more advantageous for migrants to cross the country legally. So we know that that suspension may be done with a 6-month advice. So but instead of that, your government referred itself to the July decision that was made, and you asked the tribunal to extend that because of files that would add up. So it was said that it was a speculation because the number of asylum seekers have decreased. Can you confirm that the number of asylum seekers have decreased, and why have you referred to this tribunal decision?
And if I may, let me just clarify the movement of people across our borders, not at points of entry, but through irregular migration, such as at Roxham Road. We believe that was under the circumstances of the restrictions we put in place for non-essential travel, that could not be managed safely, and so we did restrict the movement, the non-border point of entry, irregular migration. We put those restrictions in place as part of our COVID measures. I think you're also referring to the fact that we continue to operate the Safe Third Country Agreement at the point of entry. I can confirm with you that there's been a significant reduction in the people crossing from the United States into Canada. Some people have been able to meet the exemptions under the Safe Third Country. As you are also, I'm certain, aware, a federal court decision vacated the Safe Third Country Agreement, but left it in place for 6 months to allow us to seek clarity from a higher court on their decision around the Safe Third Country. The Justice Department is seeking that greater clarity and defending that agreement. We've just recently, just on Friday, we received a court decision that kept it in place until the Superior Court has an opportunity to review that decision. And finally, I can advise this committee that we've been working very closely with the United States in bilateral discussions around how that agreement might be modernized. That work has continued parallel to the determinations that are being made in court.
Thank you, Madame Michaud. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes plus a few seconds.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to ask Commissioner Luckey a question, and it arises obviously about the last few months of activity in relation to a study being done by our Committee on Systemic Racism Policing, in particular the RCMP, and the recent call by the Assembly of First Nations that you resign as Commissioner because of your failure to adequately understand and deal with that issue within the RCMP. I would say, and I take no pleasure in saying it from a personal point of view, but I do want to know how, in the face of a lack of confidence by one of the significant victim groups of systemic racism, the Indigenous people of Canada, how, in the face of a lack of confidence by them, can they expect you to deal effectively with that within the police force? Have you learned anything more about systemic racism since your last appearance before this committee? And how can we and the public also expect that you can be an effective leader in dealing with this problem?
Thank you very much for your question. You know, as I shared with my management team, when I talk about systemic racism in the RCMP, obviously I've learned a lot since that day when we first talked and when I did an interview. And when I think about systemic racism in general terms in the police and how it occurs, there's a couple of things that come to mind, obviously with systemic racism. But since that time, I've been listening, I've been learning, I've been consulting with all kinds of groups, including Indigenous leaders such as the former MMIWG Commissioner Marion Buller, the AFN National Chief, Senator Murray Sinclair, the Native Women's Association of Canada, the Inuit Women's Association.
But can I ask you directly though, how do you intend to be able to fix it, given the fact that there's a lack of confidence in you as a result of the statements by the Indigenous leaders?
Thank you. Yes, in the days and weeks following that appearance, I led the development of an action plan to address systemic racism and discrimination. And the plan has been developed in cooperation with a range of stakeholders that I mentioned. And we have a total of 17 initiatives that have been under development and are being implemented. And the objective—
Are you prepared to make that public? Does it have timelines and targets? And is that something that is of practical effectiveness? And can you make that public?
Absolutely. It's on our website as we speak at www.rcmp.com, and all the initiatives so far are put on there, and the implementation dates. And it's all about—
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Mr. Harris has stretched his time. Mr. Carrick, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Minister, for coming before the committee today. I'd like to give you the opportunity to correct the record. Actually, you mentioned Hansard and it being a very profound record for all things to do with parliamentary discourse. And it's interesting because on January 27th, Conservatives started asking questions about COVID-19, including the borders and the various aspects of what a government response would look like, all the way up until March 12th. Interestingly enough, the last flight arrived from Italy with 0 people, from Italy to Toronto with 0 people there to inspect the passengers getting off the plane. Would you like to clarify the record on how you responded earlier to your government's supposed inaction in the beginning days of the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, I'm happy to, because as I mentioned, we took the very first steps of enhanced screening for border measures at the 4 major international airports. Okay, January 22nd.
Let me correct you there. Excuse me, Minister, but major screening, is that a checkbox at the end of the immigration screening line?
Again, I compliment you on the clarity of your hindsight, but your memory's faulty, Mr. Carrick.
I'm only referring to Hansard, Mr. Blair.
Well, and in Hansard, I recall very vividly the questions that were being asked at the time, and it was as you may now recall, and I'll remind you that in January there was a concern about an illness that had begun to spread in Wuhan, in the Hubei province in China, and so we took a number of measures in order to screen people coming from that location, but we took a progressive path to significantly increasing and enhancing border secure measures directly into response to an evolving situation and in response to the advice that we
Thank you very much, Minister. And I think the record speaks for itself. So I'll leave it to your staff to go back to Hansard to look specifically at exactly what did happen, because it's very, very revealing. Now, it's interesting. In August, an American CEO received an exemption from quarantine, and you said that you would take care of that issue. It's a paraphrase, but that's basically what you said. But then it happened a month later with the CEO of Costco, and there's been a number of executives that have received these exemptions. Now, Minister, it's interesting. These CEOs get exemptions, yet I hear from constituents that are looking for compassionate exemptions, that are looking for medical treatment in various jurisdictions that have to jump through every hoop imaginable. So how can you defend the actions of your department when clearly you did not address those exemptions in the early days when they were first brought up?
Yeah, let me be very clear that the restrictions that we put in place were intended and have been extremely effective in protecting the health and safety of Canadians. And as I've mentioned, our border service officers have been also extremely effective in implementing the orders in council and the regulations have been put in place. We've also been dealing on an individual case-by-case basis as MPs from across the country and others have brought through cases. We also we've put in place, and you mentioned some of these compassion cases, we've created a process that allows people to make application before they show up at the border, so that they can verify.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I find it troubling how few applications that process was able to get through in the early days. But on to another question. Counterfeiting and smuggling are growing problems in this country. Fentanyl overdoses traced to China have continued and in fact exploded in the midst of COVID-19. Most guns used in shootings are from the United States. And you brag about your millions of dollars spent on border security and whatnot, but we just simply haven't seen the results. How can you defend the supposed, massive investments you're making when clearly it's not working? Okay.
I'll ask another question. Je vais poser une autre question. Vous voulez simplement faire un discours ou poser des questions? Eh bien, les Canadiens s'interrogent sur les résultats de ces gros investissements. Une dernière question. Monsieur le Président.
I'm having the same thing, so we'll just stop the clock there for a second. Mr. Quirk asked the question. Minister Blair tried to respond, and then we had some overlay on translation. So I'm going to go back 1 minute. And allow Minister Blair to respond to Mr. Kirk's question. You have a minute, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. We've actually been restoring a lot of the cuts that were made by a previous government and making investments and ensuring that our border service officers and the police have the resources and the tools that they need to interdict the illicit supply of drugs and guns and other contraband material that's coming in. And you talk about counterfeit and related to the issue of money laundering, Mr. Carrick. And as I think you should be aware, we used to have 12 integrated proceeds of crime units with RCMP officers with extraordinary expertise. I used to work with them, economic crime investigators. And unfortunately, in 2013, a decision was made to close all 12 of those officers. And I've been working very closely with the commissioner to restore their federal policing capacity. But it takes time to bring that expertise back after it was slashed.
Sure.
Okay. So Mr. Carrick, that exhausts your time.
And I had a great one last question, but I'll say
you're just going to have to get that zinger somewhere else. Madame Carol, Cara, final 5 minutes, and then I propose that we take a 2-minute break, and then we have another several rounds of questions with the minister. Madame Cara, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I have 2 quick questions. Minister, if I may ask, last time you were here, we were talking about our study on systemic racism and policing, particularly within the RCMP, and you certainly acknowledged that there is systemic racism within the RCMP and there are things that needed to be addressed, and yet we continue to see disappointing situations involving RCMP's involvement with Indigenous communities. Can you comment on tangible measures being taken since and within your mandate since our last meeting to address these ongoing shortcomings of the RCMP?
Yeah, thank you very much. And certainly we've been working very closely with the commissioner on a number of things that the commissioner and the RCMP have been doing directly in response. I actually, if I may, Ms. Cara, I'm going to ask the commissioner to talk about some of the steps that she's been taking because the RCMP have been working to address concerns that were raised by the committee in our last meeting.
Thank you, Minister. Some of the things that we've been looking at is obviously updating our de-escalation and crisis intervention training and making that training, recertifying that training annually. I've been leading a discussion with the police chiefs across the country on the various police chiefs on our intervention model. And looking at, we've created 2 task forces. One will be looking at a standardized framework for intervention. And the second one is in response to calls to mental health or wellness calls. And that is, again, to share best practices and to find the best ways to deal with such calls because they are obviously on the increase. We are looking at our data sets, and we've recently put many of those statistics on our website, such as physical intervention, the use of physical intervention, our calls for service, and we added employee diversity. We're looking at anti-racism training, mandatory, but it will be slightly delayed because we are going to co-develop that anti-racism training with the people that are most impacted by that and getting a lot of input to create that training. But in the meantime, we have rolled out cultural and humility training, and all senior managers have taken it. It's rolled out to all employees, and it will be mandatory for each and every employee. We are looking at race-based data, and of course, you've heard of our rollout looking at body-worn cameras. Right now, we are implementing those body-worn cameras in Nunavut. We're testing them, and they will be out soon in Nunavut, but we are doing a request for information so we can get the most modern technology in those cameras across the country. We have established an office, an RCMP Indigenous co-development, collaboration, and accountability office that will reach into the communities. Of course, we're continuing to implement our national and divisional reconciliation strategies. We want to increase the use of restorative justice, especially with a focus on pre-charge restorative justice. We want to advance the equity, diversity, and inclusion within our organization as well, and we've completed an equity and diversion inclusion strategy. We also are looking at strengthening timelines for public complaint processes, updating our cadet training program to reflect all of these changes, including adding in the blanket exercise, as well as trauma-informed approach to dealing with victims. And we've created a module of a missing persons module that is specifically targeted at the subject of the missing file is an Indigenous woman. So not only will the cadets learn about the actual file and how to investigate, but also the cultural sensitivities that go with those people most impacted by such crimes.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Minister, if I may, I know we recently extended the Canada-U.S. border closure until November 30th, and I think that's the right thing to do, as I've heard, certainly from my constituents, as well as the need for it to be closed since we're in the midst of the second wave of this pandemic. Can you perhaps update us on the situation as it stands, and what can you forecast for border closures up until the winter and with the holidays approaching to keep Canadians safe?
Thank you very much.
Very briefly.
Very briefly, but it's a very important question. I'm happy to be able to report to the committee. We have now returned to 2019 levels of commercial traffic. And I think that's a strong indicator of a rebounding economy, but it was also a very important part of the border restrictions that we put in place to maintain the flow of essential goods and services and essential workers back and forth across that border. However, the restrictions that we have put in place for non-essential travel, given the situation, particularly in the United States, but even the surge that we're experiencing in many parts of Canada, we believe that those border restrictions on non-essential travel have been effective in slowing down the spread of COVID, and they will remain in place as long as it's necessary to protect the health and safety of Canadians.
Thank you, Madame Kara.
Thank you.
I'm going to suspend for 2 minutes while people take various forms of health break. And we are going to recommence in 2 minutes with Mr. Van Popta for 5 minutes. I've yet to be advised as to the next Liberal questioner. So if somebody could communicate with the clerk, and the clerk in turn will communicate with me, and then we'll know who the next Liberal questioner is. So with that, 2 minutes.
Mr. Blair, for joining us, and to all the other witnesses for taking time out to join us this evening. Mr. Minister, you had said in your opening remarks that your ministry pivoted to COVID response when the World Health Organization declared this to be a pandemic. So, Mr. Minister, I want to ask you a question related to that. Were you made aware of the cancellation of the Health Pandemic Early Warning System that had been in place in Canada since the 1990s and had put Canada in a good position to defend against the SARS outbreak and the H1N1 outbreak? But sadly, it was canceled 6 months before the COVID-19 pandemic. Was that your decision, Minister?
No, it wasn't, Mr. Popta, and in fact, that is not part of my ministerial responsibilities. But I can tell you that there was a lot of information that we were receiving and we were tracking very carefully, beginning even in December, with the emergence of that illness in China at the time, and we continued to receive regular updates. But I don't have any direct knowledge of that organization that you referenced.
Well, certainly, Mr. Minister, that would seem to fall within your mandate, which I'm reading in your mandate letter. As Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, you will lead the government's work in assuring that Canadians are kept safe from a range of threats. Certainly, a worldwide pandemic, the worst in 100 years, would seem to fit that. So surely the Minister of Health consulted with you?
I work very closely with the Minister of Health on a number of issues, but my responsibility is overseeing the national security establishment in Canada, and of course public health is a responsibility of the Minister of Health. I might suggest you would direct your questions in that regard to her.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Were you made aware that China the Communist Party was using the United Front, Workers' Front, to siphon medical supplies out of Canada into China? And certainly if we had the global warning system, we would have detected that and been in a better position.
Well, what I can tell you is that we recognize and monitor very carefully all activities of what can sometimes be referred to as hostile state actors as it pertains to the safety and the security of Canadian interests. And the national security establishment is absolutely diligent in their responsibility to monitor that information and to take the steps necessary to protect Canadian interests. I might suggest, because I'm privileged to be joined today by our director of CSIS, who might be able to provide you with additional information as to the activities that they undertake to keep Canadians safe.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Van Popta, for your question. This is a very important item when we talk about the safety and security of Canadians. At CSIS, we do investigate the threats posed by different actors. We advise government and we take measures to reduce the threat. You mentioned specifically the United Workers' Front Department, the UFWD. This is an organization that we're very familiar with. We are concerned about the activities of the UFWD. A number of these actions will be contrary to Canada's national security, and we are taking measures. You would understand that I cannot go into details of these measures, but this is a threat that we are seized with.
All right. So let me ask you this question then, sir. Would the early warning system have put us in a better position to have detected what was going on with the United Front?
So if my understanding of the early warning, the Global Public Health Information Network, housed at the Public Health Agency, that was to do open source research to determine what we called, low signal of potential pandemic issues. This was an organization that was very much looking at the early warning from an open source perspective. Your question specifically regarding PPE and the use of UFWD to maybe obscure the sourcing and maybe procure some of the PPE in Canada to export back to China, this would not have been in the remit of the Global Public Health Intelligence Network.
Thank you, Mr. Van Popta. One of either Mr. Anand-Sanghri, Madame Kara, or Madame Damoff. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and your colleagues for joining us today, and good to see you again. Minister, I want to just start with you, ask you a very direct question about hostile state actors. I know it's an issue that's confounding many countries, including the United States. There was a significant report out last week by the FBI, and I know in Canada it's becoming an increasingly worrisome issue. Can you comment on the steps that the government's taking towards ensuring that hostile state actors don't harm Canadians, and their role here is quite limited?
Yes, and let me tell you that this is an area which a number of my agencies and departments, and particularly CSIS, are seized with. As part of the national security establishment, we monitor very carefully the hostile activities of a number of different state actors. I would also direct you, Gary, to a report that was just earlier issued by NSICOP, which is a committee of parliamentarians that also identified the growing risk of the activities of certain countries. And for example, NSICOP did point specifically to the activities of the government of China as an example of as a state actor, which can be contrary to the interests of Canadians. And I want to be very clear, Gary, that we remain vigilant, and we are prepared to take and are taking the steps necessary to protect Canadians' interests against undue influence and intimidation for Canadians at home and abroad. And we recognize that there are activities undertaken by a number of state actors which are contrary to Canada's interests with respect to the misappropriation of intellectual property, about influencing various economic decisions. I want to assure you and this committee that we remain vigilant, and we are very thoughtful and mindful of our responsibilities to protect Canadian interests. I would leave it as well. I don't know whether the director wants to add further to that. And I think in fairness, we can't and shouldn't get into specifics of that work, but I believe Canadians need to be reassured that we remain vigilant and we are prepared to act to protect their interests.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to pose my next question to Commissioner Lucki. So thank you for the answer, Commissioner. I do want to just say that I think within the last 6 months and since your last appearance, we've seen a continuous issue of racism that's permeated within the RCMP. I do think that one of the conversations I've had over the last several weeks is, why is there one set of rules for people who are racialized, who are Indigenous, who are Black, and why is there another set of rules for others? And we saw that clearly in the way the RCMP handled the issue of the fisheries in Nova Scotia. Madam Commissioner, we need a direct action plan. I know you've outlined several things that the RCMP is doing. However, I think, as I indicated the last time I spoke, the urgency of the situation is important. We have seen extraordinary work, and for example, the Chief of Police in Peel just signed up with the Ontario Human Rights Commission, a significant game changer in the way policing is going to be undertaken in Peel. And I think there are very concrete steps within Canada that's available for the RCMP. When can we expect direct and concrete action on racism? This is the issue of our time, in my opinion, even more so than the pandemic. And I think it's one where...
Selon moi, il y a trop de silence de la part du gouvernement. Cela pose problème. Nous voulons des échéanciers, des délais clairs, s'il vous plaît.
Second here, we're getting cross conversation.
The interpreter apologizes. The issue is resolved.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Commissioner Lucki.
Yes, thank you for that question. I mentioned before, we're looking at our organization as a whole, and we're looking at those systems and those processes, those policies and procedures that will eliminate systemic racism, including, which I haven't mentioned yet, our whole recruiting process. We're looking at the way in which we recruit. We want to make sure that we are in fact reflective of the communities that we serve. And so we want to make sure our proactive recruiters are reflective of that. And within our systems that within the recruiting systems, we bring in the right people. We are going to be testing for those types of behaviors that could negatively impact their interactions. And we will be sure to bring in the best people through character-based leadership. Again, once they get in, we need to make sure that the training continues. So we've introduced a number of training initiatives at our academy, but that will continue into a full set of leadership training that we've brought in the last 6 to 8 months, or actually in the last year. And
unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there. I'm sorry to be interrupting people continuously, but we are under a clock. Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. There was an announcement on the easing of measures for more family reunification in October. The Prime Minister really emphasized how important it was for the Border Services Agency to work with the Department of Immigration as well as with the CBSA. Here's what I'm wondering. The CBSA falls under the Public Safety Department's purview, right? Yes or no? In that case, it is incredibly important to know where directives come from and who is leading. Here's what we've noticed. Decisions being made by border services agents at the borders are very arbitrary. For example, I worked with a constituent of mine. She was trying to bring her partner to Canada from abroad, and border services agents said that the final decision would be made by whichever border services agent was at the border when he arrived. And I couldn't get any more specific information. You mentioned earlier that your government makes decisions on a case-by-case basis, but here's what is important to know. Our constituents, when they get sent back to other countries at the border, they don't want to have to call their MPs. And some colleagues, some other MPs have mentioned some exemptions for example, CEOs who were allowed to come into Canada without quarantining. So why are directives not clear? Why are directives not determined in advance? Why are we relying on case-by-case judgments, snap judgments by border agents?
Question, and you raise a couple of very important points, but I'll try to answer very quickly. First of all, you referred to the business executives coming in at the border. Business executives are not exempt unless they are engaged, first of all, in essential work. And we've actually defined for the entire country, all the provinces and territories, what constitutes essential work. And it's based on the 10 critical infrastructure sectors that have been identified in the economy. And so they must be engaged in essential work. And the purpose of their travel must also be essential. And so they must be qualified for entry by being on that list. But then it is up to the border service officers to determine the essential nature of their transit into Canada. Now, with respect to compassionate cases, it often involves such things as attestations, doctors' reports, and other evidence that frankly is not able to be evaluated by the border service officer, some of it for privacy reasons. And so we've established a process, and this is very important. And if it's for qualification under a family reunification, those processes are managed by the Immigration Department, the IRCC. If it is a compassionate reason for not family related, but rather for other types of relationship, somebody coming to visit a relative who may be dying of a terminal illness, then that's managed by the Public Health Agency of Canada. That process enables officials to determine the eligibility of that person for exemption. That eligibility is predetermined, presented to the border service officer, who then can allow that individual in. It's actually a very robust system that we put in place.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave that answer there. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. We talked about systemic racism in policing, but there's also, of course, well-known systemic racism in the prison system in our country under the Correctional Services of Canada. The Globe and Mail, Tom Cardoza's story on the last weekend identified clear racial discrimination in risk assessments leading to longer sentences, less rehabilitation program, less access to programs, and harsher treatment within prison. We've had Anthony Doob's report a couple of days ago, underscoring again discrimination and failure, gross failure to meet the obligations under the Charter of Rights for solitary confinement, now called SIUs. These things continue layer after layer to be discovered and upended. When are we going to see actual changes that are going to be reduce the prison population of Indigenous and Black and people of color, and when are we going to see these fixes being done? And I want to ask the minister that, not the representatives of the CSC. They've got 19,000 employees for 12,500 inmates, down from 14,000 a few years ago. Why is there not an action taken? Why are we waiting for oversight after oversight, reiterating the problem without a solution?
Unfortunately, you only have about less than a minute.
And Jack, we're not waiting. And as a matter of fact, we actually brought in Professor Anthony Doob to oversee and to comment and assist us with the implementation of the SIUs. We take these issues very seriously, and I want to demonstrate to you how seriously. In the throne speech, Jack, I'll take you back to it. The government made a very strong commitment. We said we will introduce legislation and make investments to address systemic inequities in all phases of the criminal justice system, from diversion to sentencing, from rehabilitation to records. We've undertaken that we'll move forward on enhanced civilian oversight of all of our law enforcement agencies, including the RCMP. We're modernizing training for law enforcement, including dealing with standards of use of force, de-escalation, dealing with people in crisis, and training for anti-racism. And we've also undertaken to co-develop with Indigenous nations a new legislative framework for First Nations policing as an essential service. Jack, there's much work to do, but we've made real commitments, and I look forward to having your support.
When is it going to happen is the question.
It is a bit of a challenge for the chair to get two Irishmen to stop talking at each other. With that, we're going to move on to Mr. Motz. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, your government keeps telling Canadians that you are committed to evidence-based decision-making. In fact, your mandate letter even contains that same statement. And yet, without any evidence to support the decision, you told Canadians on May 1st, through an order in council, that you were banning military-style assault rifles under the guise of improving public safety. You and your government actually invented the term military-style assault rifle to deliberately mislead Canadians not familiar with Canada's already vigorous gun laws into believing that we have a problem where none exists. In fact, military and assault rifles are already prohibited in Canada. You know this already, and have been for over 40 years. Everyone knows that taking the lazy approach and attacking legal Canada's law-abiding firearm owners will do nothing to improve public safety. Most Canadians are left to wonder what the real motive was behind the Liberal misguided gun ban plan. So, as I said, on May 1st, you banned 1,500 types and models of firearms. That firearms up to that point in time had been approved by the RCMP as safe and legal to own. Since then, nearly 500 more firearms and numerous variants have been added to that ban list, almost 2,000 now. Is that number fairly accurate?
Your mute is on.
Let me just come off of mute there and respond to some of that. And I think, Glenn, it's important. You and I could debate it, but let's hear what the people who are responsible for keeping our communities said. The Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police said Ontario's police leaders support a prohibition on all military-designed assault rifles. And in our view, these weapons have no place in our communities, and they should be reserved only for use by Canada's military. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police declared that there should be a ban on the importation of these weapons, and they said that military assault rifles, their language, were produced for the sole purpose of killing people in large numbers. And the current president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police said on their behalf, in response to the prohibition that we introduced May 1st, as a chief of police, the Canadian Chiefs believes that the measure taken by this government finds balance, and it ensures the safety of our members when they respond to calls for service.
Minister, you and I both know that there is no such thing. Minister, you and I both know there's no such thing as military-style assault weapons in this country. They've been banned for 40 years. So to misguide and mislead Canadians is disingenuous on your part. So you didn't answer my question about how many are actually banned, because either you don't know. So if you don't know the answer to that question, then obviously how are Canadians supposed to know, given the firearms reference table is not even available to them? It's only available to the RCMP or to law enforcement and to retailers. Now I'm going to move on to the next question. In June, in the House, I asked you how many times you had changed the list of banned firearms. You told me none. Clearly, that was untrue. I asked you how many 22 caliber rifles, firearms, you had banned. You didn't answer the question. I then asked you how many shotguns you had banned. You said, and I quote, did not prohibit any shotguns. Again, that was clearly untrue. In fact, the May 1st firearms ban now includes over 80 22 low-caliber rifles and over 60 shotguns. Additionally, you've banned over 300 single-shot rifles used for hunting and target shooting. Minister, you have made numerous statements that you know are factually inaccurate. This entire debate requires truth, honesty, and fact-based, not deliberately misguided statements or misleading statements and fear-mongering. Can you please explain to the Canadian public how 22 caliber rifles, pump action rifles, break open single shot rifles, and shotguns can possibly be categorized as military style, fully automatic rifles? Why mislead the House, the committee, and Canadians, Minister?
Yeah, just to be very clear, Glenn, we're not misleading anyone. We're taking the necessary action to strengthen gun control and to protect Canadians. And although I appreciate your advocacy on behalf of the gun lobby, our advocacy and our work is on behalf of Canadians and keeping them safe. And let me be very clear. On May 1st, we issued by order in council a prohibition, and nothing has been added to that except I would just point out to you that firearms that were prohibited in that list included designs, receivers, or other variants of rifles such as the AR-10 and the AR-15, which made them prohibited. And then it is the responsibility of the RCMP and the Canadian Firearms Program to identify additional weapons that contain those variants and receivers as prohibited.
You can't blame the RCMP for this. You can't blame the RCMP for this issue.
Glenn, I'm not blaming anyone.
These variants, these are not military-style assault rifles. You and I both know that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that vigorous interchange. With that, we're going to move on to Madame Damoff. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I came up sooner than I thought I was going to. Minister, I think I'll direct this one to you. I've been made aware of a few studies that are older studies on body-worn cameras from like 2010 to 2015. I had a group from my riding who met with your staff last week, and they had a number of more recent data, in particular a 2019 study from the Metro DC Police, which is the largest scale randomized study of body-worn cameras to date. And the conclusion was that body-worn cameras have very small and statistically insignificant effects on police use of force and civilian complaints. Now, I know there's a pilot that's happening right now in Iqaluit, and I guess my question, Minister, is I'm concerned that we could be spending money on something that could be better spent to actually transform policing, things like enhancing Indigenous policing. Pilots like the one in Toronto at the Native Family and Child Services, which is based on Kwanlin Dunn, to deal with urban Indigenous policing issues. So mental health support. So I guess my question, Minister, is, are we treating Iqaluit as a pilot and actually looking at data, or have we made a commitment for body cameras for all of the RCMP?
Thank you very much. It's an important question. Pam, I want to be really clear. We're not talking as body cameras as a panacea and a response to all of the myriad of issues and concerns that have been identified. But one of the concerns that we heard very clearly is the need for accountability And there is a very strongly held belief, and I believe there is evidence, that the best evidence of a transaction or an interaction between the police and any citizen is video evidence. And we've seen the value of that video evidence. It's revealed cases that otherwise would never have come to light. And so ensuring that there is an accurate record of that interaction is an important element of accountability. But the camera in and of itself doesn't do anything unless we also have very strong regimes of fulsome accountability, which are both transparent and fair and timely. And we've in this earlier discussions, we talked about the importance of putting those systems in place. And so we're absolutely committed to putting in a far more robust system of oversight and accountability. And I believe making sure that there is the best evidence of those transactions is also an element. There's also some suggestion, I believe, that when there is a record, an accurate record of the interaction between the police and the public, people tend to behave themselves a little better, ideally. I think that's hopeful. And, we saw some of those terrible tragedies in the United States, for example. The George Floyd incident likely would not have come to the public's attention without the video evidence that was available. And that quite frankly has changed the world and changed our society. And that video evidence is compelling, and I believe it is the basis of very strong reform. And so I just want to assure you that we've been working with the Iqaluit and with the territories and with the provinces. I believe that there are a number of measures that we can take, but I want to also assure you, they don't take the body cameras, for example, as one element of improving accountability, does not take the place of all of the other important work of improving training and hiring and all the relationship building and the work that we must do in communities to connect with people. And that involves a number of different policing models. As I've mentioned, a new legislative framework for dealing with Indigenous policing. There's a great deal of work to do. And although one element, I think there's value in the body cam rollout. We're seeing that in police jurisdictions right across Canada, and it will include the RCMP, but it's not all that we need to do. And certainly it's not in any way, it's not an alternative. It's in addition to the things that need to happen.
Thanks.
A little less than a minute.
Okay, thanks, Minister. I just, I guess I go back to my question about Colton Boushie, though. If we can't get reports back when there are issues and complaints that come forward, and I know you're as frustrated as I am with that, Minister. So I'll turn the rest of my time over to Ms. May.
If I can just respond very quickly to that, I agree that complaint systems, to be fair and to actually serve people, they have to be objective, they have to be fair, and they have to be timely. And it's not fair to the complainant, and it's not fair to the police officer to have these matters unresolved for an almost indefinite period of time. We'll bring forward, I know the commissioner and the CRCC chair are working on new timelines, but I believe that we may require legislative and regulatory amendment that compel people to get that done on time.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Damoff. Ms. Stubbs, 5 minutes, and I did hope to squeeze a question in from Ms. May towards the end of this final round.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll try to speak speedily, although I know it's the worst for the translators. Yeah. Minister, just a quick question, because corrections is under your mandate. In the latest correctional investigators report, he raised serious concerns about euthanasia in prisons. And he's called on the government to stop the practice altogether. Today, he was at the committee and he said, quote, he is deeply disturbed by 3 instances that he said, quote, should never have happened. You did respond to the report, but you didn't make a commitment on that exact recommendation. So I just wonder, yes or no, if you plan to implement it.
Yeah, no. First of all, to be clear, the corrections investigator pointed out very serious concerns with medical assistance in dying that took place within the institution, and he believed that wasn't appropriate. I agree with him, and we'll together take steps to ensure that people who require that assistance receive it in a health facility, not inside a prison.
Thanks, Minister. Just following up on some of the questions from our colleague MP Michaud, you had talked about declaring, you had answered in a part about declarations of workers who are essential. I do just want to tell you from the ground, there is confusion and inconsistency even about those decisions. For example, I have a constituent who told me that he's a pilot. He came with another pilot from the exact same conference, from the exact same state. They came to the border. One was arbitrarily determined to be essential, and then the other wasn't. And literally, they traveled together. So there seem to be still problems even in that area. But in addition, you note that when billionaire Uline executives were granted access to Canada and exempt from those quarantine restrictions in August, you said the CBSA made a mistake. You said, quote, a decision was made by officers based on the information provided and entry should not have been permitted. So just wondering if you could tell us what specific direction or guidance you subsequently gave CBSA to prevent decisions that you say are mistakes.
Yeah, certainly, Shannon. And unfortunately, it was incorrectly reported. And I remember when you asked me the question, suggesting that the national interest exemption had been granted in that case. That wasn't true. It was a decision, in fact, made by the Border Service officer. I wonder if the president of CBSA, John Osowski, can talk a little bit about the direction that he gave to his officers in response to that case.
That's okay, Minister. That's okay, Minister. I'll just move on a couple more questions for you. Because you had said it was a mistake, I just had wondered what directions you had given. But just for more clarity, last week when I asked about the UPS executive coming to Canada, your colleague, Minister Champagne, said that exemptions are granted after extensive consultations by Global Affairs along with the public health agencies and the provinces and the territories. So on one hand, there seems to be an assertion that decisions are made individually by CBSA agents on a case-by-case basis. Yet another minister says that they're made after extensive consultation with multiple groups. So I guess it's fair for Canadians to be confused. I just have questions about Canadian citizens themselves and a couple of examples. Canadians who may make a wrong turn and end up at the border are being forced to quarantine when they turn around and go home, or Canadians who need to simply deal with a visa issue. They're given papers saying they were never in the US, but CBSA still instructs them to put their lives on hold and quarantine for 14 days. And then a colleague also told me about an elderly man who went too far and he ended up at a border crossing by mistake. The US border officials did politely tell him to turn around. He didn't leave his car, but then when he came to the CBSA officials, he was told to go home and quarantine for 14 days. So I think it's fair for Canadians to be asking specifically for clarity about this double standard, the inconsistency, why American elite billionaires are granted quarantine exemptions and able to travel the country freely, yet Canadian citizens in these variety of different situations are being told to put their lives on hold and quarantine in their homes.
Thank you very much, Shannon.
Please.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First of all, there are no billionaires that are given a carte blanche. In the vast majority of cases, whenever there is a national interest exemption, I'll give you an example of one that I granted. There was an American citizen who had to come to Canada. She was the victim of a very serious sexual assault and had to come up and testify against her accuser. Otherwise, the court was going to lose jurisdiction. That was an Alberta case, and I issued a national interest exemption for that person to come into the country. But we put in place with the regional and provincial health authority and the Public Agency of Canada a very rigorous regime for that individual to follow to make sure the Canadians were not put at risk. I also want to assure you that with respect to those individuals who had left Canada and then were turned back, we resolved that issue by order in council that was issued effective October 31st, so 2 days ago. And now those individuals will be able to return without going into quarantine unless they got out and were exposed on the American side, in which case we'll take whatever steps are necessary to protect Canadians' health and safety.
We're going to have to leave the answer there. Madame Kara, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Commissioner Kelly. Commissioner, we had Dr. Zinger before this committee just an hour ago on his annual report. And his report was quite appalling in terms of showcasing the unfortunate reality of correctional services. He was very critical about the lack of access of credible educational and vocational resources available to inmates, as it impedes on their ability to find meaningful work opportunities upon completion of their sentence. Can you you talk a bit about what are some of the educational and vocational opportunities that are currently provided, and what is your plan to incorporate some of his recommendations?
Commissioner Kelly?
Sorry, I'm having trouble getting off mute. So for us, obviously, education, vocational training, employment are key factors for the safe and successful reintegration of offenders. And I just want to share with you of the offenders that have an identified need for an upgrade to their education. When we look at 2017-18 and up to now, it's actually been increasing the percentage. Same with the offenders with an identified need for vocational training. Our percentages have been increasing. The other good thing is when we look at the results related to that upgrade in education prior to the end of the sentence for Indigenous offenders, that also has been increasing. It's actually for Indigenous offenders, 74% compared to 65% for non-Indigenous offenders. And so this is certainly an increase. So, and the same applies to women. There's been an increase from 64.7 to 80%. I heard what the OCI had to say. Definitely, we offer a number of vocational training with third-party certification. And I do want to stress that in 2008, 19, 20, it was probably the highest that we've offered. Almost 18,000 certifications were earned by men offenders, of which 5,000 were for Indigenous men, and then 2,500 for women, of which 1,000 were for Indigenous women. And our vocational certifications cover a significant breadth of types of employment. So it's safety certification, construction, horticulture, manufacturing, and definitely where Corcan is working very, very hard to expand the breadth of services that we can offer. The other thing that we're looking at, and we're quite excited, we discussed it at our executive committee just 2 weeks ago, it's established a virtual approach to deliver critical CSC correctional programs digitally. Certainly, COVID-19 for us has showed us that we need to move more into digital services. Definitely, CSC has its challenges, but this is where we're moving to. We're also ready to launch a digital education pilot at one of our Ontario institutions. I will admit, it's been in the works for quite some time, but now it's going to be launched. I'm looking forward to the results because this is something that we're going to be looking at expanding.
Thank you.
1 minute.
My next question's for Commissioner Lucki. Commissioner, perhaps I alluded to this question last time you were here, but we've had some significant number of witnesses that talked about this. There have been many calls for the reconstructing of the RCMP to remove contract policing. We've certainly heard this call from numerous witnesses mentioning that RCMP is too big and has too many roles, which makes it difficult, if not impossible, to govern, and that the RCMP needs to get out of contract policing. We've seen disappointing shortcomings of this, even just recently, in RCMP's failed approach to advance Indigenous reconciliation. In fact, we've seen quite the opposite. Can you comment on if you think the current RCMP contracting model is a good idea, considering your mandate to advance Indigenous reconciliation, or should it be removed?
Unfortunately, that question took it down to about 3 seconds to answer, which would be probably an unsatisfactory response. So I'm going to have to, we'll have to ask that question at some other point. Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes. And I'm going to try and get Madame May in for 2.5 minutes as well. And that should pretty well do it. So Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not in agreement with my conservative colleagues here. You promised to ban assault firearms, but they are still the Remington ICR. They're still on sale. That looks like the R15 rather the SKS that resemble the AK-47. Those are weapons that are not restricted actually, and there are other weapons that are falling through the cracks. So what we are saying is that your government decided to legislate on more popular firearms instead of defining what is an assault weapon. So the reality is that you react to a tragedy like the one in New Scotia instead of focusing on prevention. And while banning these popular models, people will just buy other kinds of weapons. So don't you think that your measure is now not useful?
Vous êtes sur mute, Monsieur le
Your
Ministre.
mute button. Minister, your mute button.
Thank you. I believe that the measures we put in place have been very effective, and we've essentially stopped the market for those weapons. I will also tell you the criteria that we applied, for example, with respect to the SKS Carbon, was that they be of modern design. And of course, the SKS Carbon, its origins was back during the Second World War, and so it was not included on this list. But I also want to assure you, Ms. Michaud, that in addition to the legislation that I've talked about bringing forward, we're also looking at establishing an evergreen process so that the Canadian Firearms Program will continue to evaluate weapons that represent a risk and that will enable us to make sure that weapons that should be not available in Canada won't be available in Canada, because we know that the gun industry is agile and adept at bringing forward new models and variants in order to try to get around the rules. That we've seen evidence of that quite vigorously over the past several years. And so we'll have a system that maintains an evergreen process of classification that it will be necessary to keep Canadians safe.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Blair, you mentioned, you quoted back the throne speech to me in response to my question about action. Yet, you had a recommendation back in June from Ivan Ziegler of the legislation related to fixing the issue of in the prisons related to sexually coercive violence. And Mr. Zinger said today something that struck me as being very remarkable, that the CSC has a history of being dismissive and unresponsive to recommendations that he has. So I have two questions to you. Why are you passing the buck to this committee to look at legislation instead of sending it off to the Justice Department to go ahead and draft something? Because there's a great set of recommendations and plans set out by Dr. Zinger. And secondly, are you going to fix this business of the CSC being unresponsive and dismissive of recommendations from the correctional investigator?
Yeah, Jack, these are important questions. First of all, with respect to Dr. Zinger's report on sexual violence and sexual coercion in our institutions, that's completely unacceptable. He did make recommendations for us to consider legislation, and I actually thought that the Public Safety Committee, all of you, might find the opportunity to really contribute to that discussion, to make sure that we take an appropriate and comprehensive response to that. It's entirely up to the committee, by the way. I'll leave it to all of your good judgment whether or not you think that's an effective use of your time. We're still quite prepared to deal with the issue. There are a number of other ways, as you've suggested. I actually have a great deal of respect for the input and the contribution that parliamentarians can make to this, and I thought it might be something worthy of your response. I also don't agree that CSC has been non-responsive, but at the same time, I really value the work of the correction investigator. He and I speak quite frequently, and I am absolutely committed to ensuring that we do the things that are necessary to produce better outcomes for people in our correction institutions, and that we fulfill our duty of care to keep them safe while they are incarcerated in our federal institutions. And so I work very closely with the federal investigator. I very much value his advice and his work. And I will also tell you that in my work with the Correction Services of Canada and Commissioner Kelly, I believe them to be very sincere in their desire and in their effort to produce better outcomes. I cited earlier in the discussion the extraordinary work they did in the pandemic to keep their inmates safe. I believe that they are making progress, and I am prepared to support them in that work based on the excellent advice we receive from the correction investigator, and hopefully with good advice and input from the Public Safety Committee as well.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Thank you, Minister Blair. Why is it with Minister Blair and Mr. Harris, I am forever struggling to stay within the time frame? I guess it's just coincidental. Madame May, who will, of course, never stray beyond the time frame that's allocated to her, which in this case is 2.5 minutes.
I'm extremely grateful, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. And I want to put this to Minister Blair. The language in the mandate letter around, I had to search for it really to figure, is this really speaking to racism? But the idea that you have been mandated to address, quoting, unconscious bias, cultural competency training seems to coalesce around the idea that Superintendent Leckie has told us that we're going to see anti-racism training. I want to put something to you, Mr. Blair, and ask if you don't think this would be more productive. In the United States in 2006, the FBI reported that white supremacist groups were deliberately infiltrating law enforcement, deliberately infiltrating the U.S. military. I would like to ask you to do, if you're willing to take this on, and ask your CBSA and RCMP directors to do a complete screen of the social media content of all their employees and find the ones that belong to Proud Boys, find the ones that were white supremacists who don't have unconscious bias but have overt racism, and remove those people from service.
Elizabeth, if I may respond, I agree that there's absolutely no place in policing, in law enforcement, or in any element of public service for racists and white supremacists and anti-Semites and Islamophobes. And I think that we have a responsibility to purge those influences and those individuals from the public service and most certainly from policing. I will tell you that I believe that the overwhelming majority of police officers do their job with integrity and professionalism and very sincere respect for all of the people in Canada. But we also know that ideologically motivated extremism, white supremacy is unfortunately and tragically pervasive in certain elements of our society. And I am completely in agreement that there needs to be absolute vigilance among those responsible for policing and our military and any other element of public service to make sure that there is no place for it there. And I will also assure you that we are pretty vigorous in the national security establishment. We've started to clearly identify the threat of ideological motivated extremism, and in particular white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and others. And we're tracking them down and making sure that we take action effective to prevent their influence in our society.
Are you looking for them within the forces? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, yes, and that was the question as to whether you were actually look for them. Anyway, you can respond directly. I believe my Conservative colleagues have a minute or two. Mr. Kirk, is that?
That is correct. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. It's been a very enlightening evening. A couple quick questions. Can you share with the committee what percentage of rail cars are inspected as they come across our borders?
I would defer that question to the person responsible for the inspection of rail cars crossing the border, and that would be the president of the CBSA.
Okay, if I could get a quick answer on that, that'd be fantastic.
Well, why don't I undertake to you that we'll get you that information, and I will make sure that we send it to you. I will tell you that CBSA does an extraordinary job of collecting data, and I have a ton of it I'm happy to share with you.
Well, I appreciate that, Minister. And I would just as a final statement say there's been a number of rail workers and border enforcement officers that have brought forward significant concerns to me, saying that the percentage is very, very low and there's an inadequate regime when it comes to the follow through on ensuring that contraband and illegal goods crossing our borders in rail cars is well taken care of. But I would cede the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Motz, if there is.
There's 1 minute left for Mr. Motz.
Perfect. Minister, as you know, there's crime labs, evidence labs are a significant part of the landscape for law enforcement in this country. And yes. As a result, we see that currently the RCMP provides, lab services to, they have the nationally mandated lab services for those law enforcement agencies who don't have their own lab or can't afford to use private labs. And we know that there's huge delays. They're being rejected. Certain amounts of evidence are being rejected. And I'm being told by crime techs from the RCMP lab that they're restricting capacity, limiting capacity, and they're even limiting the outsourcing of evidence currently to private labs, which even adds further to those backlogs. We know we're losing convictions on serious crimes, sexual assaults across this land because of that. I'm wondering whether you would commit today to ensure that we address those backlogs, Minister, and to make sure that we get those who commit these crimes are held responsible based on the evidence that's been gathered, and that we don't lose them because we can't get them the lab results back in a timely manner.
Very briefly.
Yeah, very quickly, Glenn, it's a very important question. I agree that the National Police Service and the labs that they oversee, the RCMP oversees, provide a very important services, not just to the RCMP, but to police services across the country. I don't want to get back into you with the impact of all the cuts that the RCMP experienced, but we've been significantly reinvesting in their capacity to deliver those services, and because we recognize how important they are as well.
With that brings our evening to the close. I want to thank Minister Blair and all his officials for spending these last 2 hours with us. I particularly appreciate the change in the threat posture with respect to the government of China. I have long been taking a public position that we have to treat China differently. So it was encouraging to hear the minister's comments. You also, colleagues, knows that we don't have Jean-Marie David as our clerk tonight. Jean-Marie has been reassigned away from this committee, and we now have a new clerk, Mike McPherson, and welcome, Mike, to the committee, and thank you for keeping us on track. And finally, colleagues, I just wanted to say that we keep getting all of these assignments and pile up of work. Unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to see if I can squeeze out two hours next week, and we'll do a virtual meeting, even though the House is not sitting, just to try and work into the backlog and the pile. So, with that, thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, officials, and good evening.
Yeah,